technology working. So that's a great way to begin. It's a great way for you to see some of the imagery that's downstairs, that beginning body of work that was done on behalf of the Regenerative Medicine Foundation. And let me talk with you a little bit about that. In 2010, as part of what the Regenerative Medicine Foundation does, and what it does is a body of keys, and I didn't know what I would do. Would I literally use them? Would I abstract them? How would I begin to tell this story? And I had about a year. I was a little terrified, to tell you the truth. I wasn't a scientist myself. I actually read Stem Cells for Dummies. And then I graduated some really thick volumes that Dr. Atala had something to do with once I had a basis of understanding so I could get myself in there and understand what I wanted to say visually. On this day that I took those keys and I dropped them into the water, not knowing what I would do, a little girl, age 9, came up to me and said, "Ma'am, what are you doing with those keys in your camera?" And it was that very moment that I had to have an answer. And I said, well, I've been asked to interpret some very special science, some science that a lot of people don't know very much about. And that science is about how every one of our bodies has special keys inside of it that can unlock itself to heal itself. And she looked up at me and she said, "Wow." And that's where it all began. These keys, locks, and mysteries, this language of interpretation, had its birth on that day. Downstairs, you're going to see the original body of work. You will then get to see my gift that I was given by the Wake Forest Regenerative Medicine Institute. They invited me into their lab with an open camera. They said, "Go take pictures of anything you want." And so for me, I got to walk around this very lab that I'd visited on a couple of occasions learning about the science, but to take pictures of what they're doing and yet again visually interpret that through my lens. So that will be a part of the exhibition downstairs. It comes full circle when you see the scientific images that were also asked to join this exhibition. We put out a global competition. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the slide presentation. You'll see the beautiful work that they're actually doing in labs, but they've taken pictures of their microscopy, and they're just like gorgeous abstract paintings. And you'll see it where it begins, their work, my interpretations, and then ultimately these abstractions. Part of that story of the passersby and the people that I interacted with is to tell you that these keys and these locks went with me literally everywhere for about a year, and some of them still do, because I never know when I might add another image to the collection. They went on every car, every plane, every train, every country, through inspections, and people looking at me, "What do you have in that suitcase?" Because I wouldn't let them get checked, by the way. I was terrified they'd be go missing. So some of these went with me to New Zealand, and in that phase of this story, wherever I was, and if something sparked an idea, I would get those keys out, like the volcanic ashes in Rotorua, or a clay subject in the middle of a field, or even yet farther down, I had 15 minutes in a little tiny town, and I walked upon this giant piece of machinery, and I had one key with me, and I walked up to it, and it fit into that piece of machinery so beautifully. It was holding that key to that cure. These key installations, as I mentioned, were inspired just by me walking around. I'd be driving, I'd just screech the car, stop, and I knew it was a moment that I had to stop and tell another part of the story. When I was in Nashville and I was flying in one morning, the blue streaming sky was shining down on this web, this matrix of these train tracks, and it was just extraordinary. To me, those train tracks represent the veins of life, carrying cures to people. So the very next day, up I got, keys, cameras, and off I went down to find my way to these 1900s historic train tracks. When I arrived that day, I looked for a track worker to give me permission to go on to them because I knew they were still active and dangerous to go to. I was pointed to ascend to the top of the track tower, like an air traffic controller. And so I climbed up to the top of the track tower, cameras, and a someone who didn't look like she belonged on the train tracks. And the gentleman asked me, "Ma'am, how can I help you?" And I told the story of the keys and the locks and the mysteries and how I've been asked to communicate the power of this amazing science that one day could cure, not treat disease, could one day eliminate dialysis machines and diabetes, could help us grow skin. And I stopped right about there, and he said, "Ma'am, this sounds like a good cause, but please go to the end of the train tracks, that area I know you want where they're all crossing. Be very careful, listen to the tracks. And if you have to give up a key, please sacrifice a key." I had Omar, my cab driver, who took me down way to the end of these tracks. Now he was officially on this journey with me, and I warned him by taking me in the taxi fare what he was up for. Easy to come by. We all have them in our drawers, or our grandmothers, or our grandparents, or our parents have them. You can find them. And when people started to hear about what I was doing, people were giving them to me. The locks was a whole nother matter. I searched every city, every locksmith. I went everywhere looking for beautiful old locks. To me, they had to be locks that were handmade, that had their own story to fit into the fabric of what I was doing. At the end of a day, a very rainy, cold day, I finally found a locksmith that would take me in for 15 minutes of the shop being open, and there they were. A wall of antique locks, hand-forged, over 200 years old, stunning. I was flabbergasted, and I didn't know what to do, and I started to pull them all off the wall. And I said, "I can't make a decision, I don't know what to do." And this locksmith that was in Manhattan, he didn't have a whole lot of patience for somebody at the end of the day. He was ready to go. And so I could tell, but I was trying to pick 3 that maybe I would use. They were very collectible and very antique, if you know what I mean. And he finally, 5 minutes before the shop was to close, said to me, "Ma'am, could you please tell me what you're doing with these locks?" And so I gave my little 3-minute section of the story. And he sat back and he said, "Would you like to borrow all of these locks? I'll ship them to you whenever you're ready. I'll just take the inventory when you go, and you just tell me when to send them." So the images downstairs will have a whole new meaning to you as you understand how all of these people interacted with me. Another component to the show down there is the 3-dimensional component. The Regenerative Medicine Foundation had me do a lot of the work in photography so that multiple editions could be made and they could share this story globally. I became so impassioned by the cause and the science and helping them share the message that I just kept going with the work. Here, I'm taking you inside my studio, because what's more fun than going inside an artist studio? At least I'll try and take you there visually. Keys, to me, embodied the body. I began to think of all kinds of creative ways that I could create these 3-dimensional forms that represented this science. When you see the sculptures downstairs, there are these beautiful suspended sculptures that are hundreds of keys. They're carved from stone clay, they're molded, they're cast in resin, and then each of them is individually sanded and carved and treated with 23-karat gold, moon gold, dream gold, palladium, and I even found 52 shades of Japanese silver that I had sent to me from Japan to make them glow and come to life. And I hope when you experience them, you'll feel the same way. This is some of the shots in the studio with all the keys. It just becomes this fabric of keys, and they all are beautiful and have their own special meaning. And here's a few of the shots, just like a scientist in a lab, where we've got all of our tools, and we're creating these objects that we work with to tell the story of our art and the story of our science. One of the most fun parts for me is talking about this visual vocabulary and taking their story and thinking about our bodies and creating art that represents our bodies. On the left-hand side is a clay structure that I call a cell plate representing the interior of our body. Those then became casts and molds, and then the resin structure on the right with the veins of life shooting up through it are holding the suspended keys that you will see. I was lucky, and I hope I'll be lucky again, to go back down to the Regenerative Medicine Institute in Winston-Salem. And each time I've given it a tour by another scientist, and each time they tell me another little sentence that tells me more of their story. Dr. Yu, I believe, said to me, a body work of tissue producing fruiting bodies. What better than to create a beautiful structure that produces these beautiful rainbows of fruiting keys to the cure. In the lab, you see really cool things. They're able to print 3D our body parts. And they let me take these photographs of these 3D printed noses, vertebrae, kidneys, and then you'll see these images downstairs. Through my lens, I treated them with lots of color and a little bit of whimsy to pull you in to learn more about the science. Someone wrote, a new nose, or an ear, or a kidney, the future of our new organs. 3D printed prototypes by the team at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center's Institute for Regenerative Medicine. The future could be the sometimes deadly wait for a donor match. Another of the images you'll see downstairs. And now beginning to talk a little bit about the science competition. The images that were submitted to accompany this. First, I want to do a nice shout out to Dr. Linus Kuzma, who's also in the audience. He is an extraordinary scientist. He's been 30 years in the field with Baxter, but he also is quite an amazing photographer, and just recently has had quite a penchant for microscope photography, so much so that I think he has one of the best labs in the country in his own basement. This is his image of mushroom spores, which he goes out and hunts and then does DNA sequencing on. So I couldn't think of a better person to have co-jury with me, the exhibition you'll see downstairs. The Regenerative Medicine put out a call internationally, and what we were asking for was any kind of imagery in the field of regenerative medicine that would be also possibly considered as art. And these scientists had a really good time with it. If you look at some of these titles, they were really embracing that what they were doing, the work they're doing to look at disease states, could actually have a beautiful application as art. And when you get to words like the full Monty and the devil melanoma, Richter meets Kandinsky and went out fishing, you know they're embracing that their science is also art. And I think there's so many similarities between what scientists and artists do. Scientists are a lot more specific than artists, but the kind of problem solving that they're doing has a lot of commonality and fun path. We had over 80 submissions. There are 26 that were selected for this competition downstairs. And then tonight also we're going to be announcing the 10 top prize winners, which the Regenerative Medicine Foundation funded, and they will also travel to another exhibition in San Francisco. I picked this one in particular because when we were talking about the competition and how we were asked to jury it, and the criteria that we were asked or used to jury it were some pretty common things. What was the quality of the image? Was it engaging? And this one in particular became pretty title-driven. When we were talking about describing the science, a person asked me, well, what is that you're looking at? And I said, well, I'm not a scientist. I'm an artist. But the scientist that helped me jury could tell you exactly what this is. I do know that it's a fluorescence of cells that the scientist took a picture of. But when I describe the meaningfulness of it to me, cells performing secret handshakes, to me it was a scientist being given a window to the secret to help cure the disease. Each key, in my mind, carries its own unlockable magic to heal. The shapes that you see transform those mysteries so we can see and we can understand. And now it's time to bring up Dr. Atala, who does see and understand a tremendous amount about the science. He's got an amazing team of over 300 scientists that work with him in Wake Forest Baptist Regenerative Medicine Institute. He's not the only regenerative medicine institute. They are all over the world. His is the biggest. I took this quote from a recent article with him that, if you get an opportunity to read, is just an amazing insight into the science and into what they do each day. But this certainly does describe Dr. Atala. He knew it was impossible to grow human bladder cells out of the body. And he knew it was impossible to build a bladder. And it was impossible to make a heart and a urethra and a liver. It was impossible to find a new source of stem cells. Dr. Anthony Atala knows everything was impossible until it wasn't. We, with he, all hold the keys to the cure.